kind of like Atlantis or El Dorado, there can be some question as to where it would possibly be. But I think the more important question is how and why. How can a monastical institution like Shangri-La exist? And why would it be founded? If you've never read James Hilton's Lost Horizon story, then what you might have heard from cultural osmosis is that Shangri-La is a utopia of the kind where long life and great knowledge and spirituality are on tap. And it's also especially tied to the notion of Orientalism, where people from East and South Asia have a unique connection to spirits, states of mind, and other metaphysical phenomena. And this is the main part, where Western visitors can expect special treatment and hospitality in their own personal quests for this enlightenment. The tenets of the Enlightenment itself don't really matter. Search for real-life examples of places called Shangri-La, and you'll find mainly tourism. After reading the novel from which the concept of Shangri-La originated, I can say that the how and why of that utopia's conception are far more profound. In both the book and the famous film adaptations, Shangri-La is introduced to us as we follow escapees fleeing violent revolution in China. They board an aircraft to spirit them away from the upheaval, but are essentially kidnapped and taken off course, and up to the then uncharted mountain ranges of the Tibetan Plateau, the colloquial roof of the world. Alas, whatever is planned for their touchdown, the passengers instead come down in a crash landing, as even the most advanced aviation technology of the period is still no match for high-altitude freezing winds and the distance of such an isolated place. The icy, windy mountains of the plateau might as well be the moon for how inhospitable it is to human life. The passengers are utterly helpless to survive, let alone be found, as their one lead, their kidnapper, dies during or soon after the crash. But, lo and behold, rescue comes for them, in the form of a group of unfamiliar locals, that, strangely enough, appear prepared to receive them. They were expected. And, more remarkably, shelter is not far. And that's when the passengers, and we, first lay eyes, as it were, on Shangri-La. Physically, there's nothing mystical about Shangri-La. Near the mouth of a mountain pass, Shangri-La sits on a crag, and is a large, for a monastery, compound of apartments, pavilions, and facilities, packed with literature and art in all physical forms. The tea garden, library, and music room get a fair amount of focus. Uniquely for such an isolated establishment and the technology of the time, they even have indoor plumbing and hot water, when the next closest human settlements would have nothing of the sort until you get back to known cities. If I read the text correctly, the lamasery Shangri-La sits at the mountain pass on the southwestern end of a valley, the Blue Moon Valley, and in the distance, presumably to the north or northeast, can be seen a large conical snow-covered mountain called Karakal, that stands out even amongst the other great surrounding mountains. These mountains are great enough that they completely block ice, snow, and wind from blowing into the valley, protecting the greenery and the people therein. That's what Shangri-La physically is. But the point of the story is that Shangri-La is also, in both meanings of the word, a mission. The point of view character Conway is an official of the British government who served its diplomatic mission in China until revolution forced him to evacuate non-Chinese from the war zone. He is a veteran of the war to end all wars, and a kind of hero to his peers, but conversely, he's also a deeply private and contemplative man. On contrasting with his younger peers, Conway is already disillusioned with upholding the glory of empire. So Conway is already open to engaging with the mystery of Shangri-La when he is summoned to meet the High Lama himself. In one night, the High Lama lays out the history and founding of Shangri-La, the policies that grew out of the isolated lamasery's unique circumstance, and its mission. Before Shangri-La was founded, an isolated group of Tibetans lived in their Blue Moon Valley. Almost 200 years before the story starts, usually around 1931, a Christian friar made his journey from Europe to the Far East, on his own mission to spread Christian teachings and make converts for his church. On the way, he got lost in Tibet, and came across that valley, and recovered from his near-death experience, and simply continued his mission in that valley. And here was a unique opportunity that truly frames the existence of that erstwhile utopia Shangri-La. A Christian missionary comes across a protected, fertile valley inhabited by a people both hospitable and, crucially, open-minded enough to accept his teachings and respond to his evangelist mission. Throughout the years, he preaches for and gains converts to his religion. Alas, this missionary, Father Perot, is unable to return to his country, and stays in the Blue Moon Valley, establishing the lamasery that would become Shangri-La. As the father lives beyond his expected lifespan, he and his fellow monks continue to grow Shangri-La, with the sporadic outside contact sufficient to appoint the remote Lama monastery with a vast collection of art and literature from Europe and elsewhere, as well as some comforts and amenities fit for their mission. It is this mission that is served by the combined remoteness of Shangri-La and Blue Moon Valley, by the collection of written works and artwork, by the local populace both happy and servile to the lamasery, and the combination of high altitude and opiate-like local tea plants allowing vastly extended lifespans. The mission is thus: Father Perot, as he's foreseen in his meditations, along with periodic news from the outside world, has come to the conclusion that the worldwide capacity for war would increase so exponentially that a single-armed man might match a whole army. With this military power that's proliferate across the world and its empires, war itself will come ever closer to killing off the societies and cultures of all humanity. Therefore, as Conway is told, High Lama Father Perot and his fellow lamas, along with all their collected works of human culture and artistic endeavor, hope to weather that storm, avoid the attentions of hostile militaristic and imperial action, and when the dust someday settles thereafter, the people again need guidance for how to live peacefully and fitfully, the establishment of Shangri-La will be available to spread knowledge that would otherwise be lost to the world. In Perot's words, the Christian ethic will at last be fulfilled, to choose kindness above all, presumably, and thus the meek shall inherit the earth. From this perspective, as written in the original book, Shangri-La has virtually nothing to do with the tenets of Orientalism, especially not mysticism or spirituality in the overgeneralized Far Eastern sense. It is far more accurate to describe Shangri-La as a European-founded and structured monastery that, like the Vatican in Italy, is a bank of knowledge and treasures. In a way, Shangri-La and the Blue Moon Valley and its native Tibetan people are a kind of utopia. For a missionary and friar, that is. So Shangri-La acting as a kind of doomsday vault for human culture is not truly unprecedented. Remember the medieval Dark Ages, when culture, knowledge, and productivity declined in the West? That was a term used by later Renaissance thinkers to elevate their cultural standing in comparison, and still considered a valid historical anecdote by the time of James Hilton writing Lost Horizon, and would probably still be taken as a given in story as well. Alas, the notion of a dark age for Western civilization has been discredited relatively recently, but the fact that lost knowledge continues to be recovered even today is something that Father Perot would probably accredit to the work done by monks in monasteries, with the church as an institution preserving and spreading knowledge beyond the borders of fiefs and the power of monarchs to limit. As for the cataclysm he's foreseen, circa 1931, conflict had already become so devastating that one man on a machine gun can kill a large group of opposing soldiers, to say nothing of the industrial-scale destruction of artillery, battleships, and aircraft bombing. In Southeast Asia specifically, China is suffering its civil war between nationalists and communist factions, and militarist Imperial Japan is making hostile moves to occupy Chinese and Russian territory. With the benefit of hindsight, it's not hard for someone like James Hilton and Father Perot to foresee that imperial ambition would carve its price out of the flesh and blood of millions of innocent people. In Europe as well, which Shangri-La would certainly be getting news from, human culture and artistry is being undermined, attacked, and systemically destroyed by movements of fascism, what value force and coercion over human connection, knowledge, and wisdom. The absolute antithesis of Shangri-La would no doubt be the book burnings endemic to those movements. It would not be hard to imagine these fascist movements would clash with the relatively liberal and modernist French, English, and American societies, making what we would come to know as a Second World War. But we cannot technically credit our hindsight as James Hilton's foresight, so what would Shangri-La's value be during and after said cataclysm? Father Perot told Conway that he hoped that Shangri-La's remoteness and humble appearance would not attract military attention, that they wouldn't be worth a bomb. But could they save people? Perot says no. Their way of life and governance can't accommodate the vast number of people that would seek shelter from the war to come, and it would likely make them a target just as well. Not to mention their very remoteness and hostile conditions surrounding Shangri-La would make reaching that refuge a fool's hope. There's an interesting aspect to consider, however. In the Second World War, the China-Burma-India theater of operations saw the Allies trying to support the Chinese militarily while cut off by the Japanese on land. So an airlift operation called Flying the Hump was organized. It was a perilous operation, using period aircraft that could barely keep flight in control in the high altitudes and freezing winds in the mountainous area in and around the Himalayas. Even with the attrition of flight crews and aircraft, the flights were conducted in conditions that, if shifted approximately to the west, would have routinely reached and crossed the area that I estimated Shangri-La would be. Given that in story it was a remarkable flight undertaken by a uniquely designed aircraft that could fly high and far enough to reach the periphery of Shangri-La, even Father Perot would acknowledge that technology would bring the world closer to Shangri-La, nullifying its isolation and that protection in due time. That brings up an important question for later. What response from the world would we expect if Shangri-La were discovered? But for now, suppose the cataclysm of worldwide war wipes out large parts of human civilization and culture. What could Shangri-La do about it thereafter? In such a post-apocalypse, Shangri-La would stand as a repository of human knowledge that would otherwise be lost to the world. But could the world even retrieve that knowledge? The remote isolation that protects Shangri-La would also be an obstacle to anyone wishing to go and retrieve said knowledge. So who could make the trip? As the story lays out throughout the centuries, individuals and small groups have regularly trickled into Shangri-La, with the hospitable reception of the inhabitants to guide them to safety, lest they be lost in the snow. Usually, no one knows of Shangri-La before stumbling upon it, or being kidnapped and brought, and usually no one who tries to leave can survive the trip. That one group of porters that form Shangri-La's connection to the outside world are still mortal after all, and anyone who enjoys the life-extending properties of the valley and its sustenance quickly loses that youth upon exiting the valley, so only Conway in story has managed it. His tragedy is worth a later discussion. All in all, Shangri-La's mission to preserve knowledge and fulfill the Christian ethic by spreading its wisdom to the world is hampered by the very aspects that protect it. Either people survive the journey and have a hard time leaving, or people survive leaving and have a hard time coming back. So what options does that leave? I imagine Shangri-La would need to send out emissaries to whatever geopolitical entities remain, with the expectation that they won't be able to make it back, to promise its store of knowledge to whomever will come and disseminate it. And what kind of people will make that journey? People that can form a kind of expedition or religious mission or a crusade to blaze a trail to Shangri-La and support a population of pilgrims and scholars to take the journey and quickly bring back records for use. Frankly, this circumstance is ripe for a new competition of great powers for control of a new holy land, Shangri-La. So whether Shangri-La is discovered in the middle of World War II, or in a desolated post-war world, the question becomes, who should determine the course of action in Shangri-La? Where Conway is concerned, his suitability for taking over as determined by High Lama Father Perot is stated as based on his emotional and philosophical disposition, to be quiet and contemplative, to seek knowledge and appreciate artistry, and to offer wisdom to willing listeners. Alas, if what Father Perot had foreseen of war and cataclysm comes to pass, all of that will not be enough. Shangri-La is a mission, remember, and like any objective-based institution, or any kind of corporation for that matter, for their highest goal to be met, they need certain kinds of persons and personalities to make up the business, as it were, and a kind of leadership to uphold that mission. They may take anyone to safety that needs it. Few enough survive the environs that this is not a burden. But for anyone to make full use of Shangri-La and contribute to its mission, not just anyone will do. It's even written that the Lamasery of Shangri-La has a problem, in that many of their members are getting along in years, very long at that, and they will need to find understudies, replacements, in due time. This actually leads to a volunteer from the Blue Moon Valley offering to journey to the outside world to find a means to bring new blood to Shangri-La, even at great risk of failure and their own death. In the book, the 4 people kidnapped are just incidentally accessible for the plan to work, while in the film, Conway is deliberately sought out. And what would the Lamas be looking for in the new blood? Based on the descriptions of the previous settled Lamas, and the positive interactions with the newcomers, they're probably looking for the curious and open-minded, who actively engage with the people and collected knowledge of the Lamasery and Valley, that see beauty and artistry and knowledge in what has been collected and cultivated, and I think ultimately, who would want to add something to it in reciprocation. This is a good premise for a thought experiment I want to try later. As for what kind of leadership Shangri-La should require, despite the written fact that governance is of the lightest possible touch within the valley, there is some requirement for a definite policy concerning matters outside the valley. After all, Shangri-La is not expected to be isolated forever. The very act of flying to Shangri-La successfully, the real-life achievement of overflying the Himalayas regularly, if not yet safely, and the future need to disseminate knowledge in service to the religious mission, while likely dealing with societies brought down to the levels of tribes and feudalism, requires a different head for leadership. It requires someone who can extol the values of kindness, knowledge, and wisdom, while averting the pitfalls of religious dogma, extractive imperialism, and destructive great power competition. It's not explicitly stated in story nor adaptation, but someone like Conway would be qualified in this realm as well. Before being spirited away to Shangri-La, Conway served in the British Empire's Foreign Office, which entails balancing the needs and foibles of empire with the impacts on the lives and the confluence of their unique human values to the peoples that the empire would lord over. If Conway took over as High Lama of Shangri-La, his job wouldn't be just to meditate and mediate the lamasery and valley. In the future, after the worldwide war and cataclysm, Conway's task would shift to sending out emissaries, preparing articles of knowledge and art for dissemination, and essentially upholding the values of Shangri-La as a source of moral authority against any wannabe tyrants and empires that come up in war's aftermath. In a way, Conway's job would be similar to the Pope's job, as we know it from the outside, whose communication is placed as a source of high moral authority among their adherents throughout the world, so much so that even non-believers or non-adherents can't easily dismiss or ignore them out of hand, lest a worldwide religious movement act in spite of them. From a certain view, in this kind of thought experiment, Conway would seem eminently qualified to be the new High Lama of Shangri-La that would survive the war to come and possibly start a new worldwide enlightenment and renaissance based on the nominally Christian ethic, were it not for Conway's tragic failing. Failure to communicate. Conway's tragic failing is his lacking communication skills. If we, the readers, didn't have a direct view into Conway's mindset, then he can be seen as having a stiff upper lip, classically English, simply because he doesn't always speak his mind, and it becomes a problem. In the film adaptation, where more dialogue is necessary, Robert Conway speaks his feelings and thoughts aloud to several of the other characters, except the people he needs to get on side. Throughout the book, Mallinson, and in the first film adaptation, his brother George Conway, think of Robert as a man of action and hero of the Empire. So when circumstances deny the group any sensible action, and when our sensible Conway recognizes those circumstances, Mallinson or George gets agitated and frantic that Robert do something to save them all from whatever's happening at any given time. When the group is being kidnapped and taken to Shangri-La, some anxiety and consternation is called for, to a point. However, it should become clear when the valley inhabitants and Chang come to their rescue and show them unconditional hospitality, with no restrictions on their movement, except where Lama's privacy is concerned, it should have become clear that there is no hostile intent, and the locals are not scheming to use the new guests for any nefarious end. In both book and film, most of the characters find something worthwhile in Shangri-La, and even reasons to stay and give back to the locals for their extensive hospitality. But not the malcontent. He is resolved not to try and understand just what they've stumbled upon, much less its value. He is so fixated on their agitation that the utopia is utterly wasted on them. In the film, the malcontent even takes a weapon, the only one that exists for hundreds of miles around, and threatens people for his indulgence, until physically stopped by Conway. It should be clear that even as some amount of doubt is healthy in general, being a blockheaded jerk to everyone isn't called for. Alas, the fault is not all on the malcontent. Conway was in the perfect position to engage them about understanding their situation. If nothing else, Conway could have put a greater effort in dispersing the malcontent's hero worship of Conway, showing them that he is not the hero of the empire that has been their own indulgence before arriving in Shangri-La. Seeing the film and reading the book, I found it personally frustrating that Conway did not make known his sentiments, observations, and conclusions that recontextualize their surface-level kidnapping. It's only after the High Lama dies and the malcontent culminates their plans to, quote-unquote, escape Shangri-La that Conway finally lays out everything he's learned since their arrival. What might have worked with time and process, explaining everything at the end, is utterly ineffective at persuading the malcontent to be less thoughtless in their disbelief. So, here comes the tragedy. The malcontent is content to leave, and is resentful enough to wish for a future bombing of Shangri-La as revenge for their hurt pride. Conway, meanwhile, is content to stay and leave behind the world and empire that held him despite himself. The tragic turn comes when the malcontent involves another in their personal stakes. The woman is different between the adaptations, but the supposed dilemma is the same. The malcontent claims she wants to leave too, framed as a prisoner of a bunch of old men. And Conway is appealed to for his sense of love for the woman, for his empathy that the woman and the young man are in love and want to leave, and his sense of justice that they shouldn't be held in Shangri-La against their will. When Conway is bombarded with questions to the lack of positive evidence for the claims of long life discovered by the Lamas, and that long life is fleeting upon leaving, Conway could have countered with a very simple question, one very simple thread that would likely unravel the disbelief. What year does she think it is? If they answer correctly, the follow-up would be, how old are you? Then, why do you wonder that you don't look your age? If they don't acknowledge that something in Shangri-La is keeping the woman young, and that there is veracity to suffering quickly advancing age upon leaving, then Conway should have been more self-assured that theirs is a foolhardy, headstrong obstinance, and short of force, Conway can't keep them from leaving, and should feel no reason to go as well. Instead, Conway gives in to his old self, as it were, and leaves with the malcontent and his love interest, leaving behind Shangri-La forever. This is the lost horizon, the chance at a new life that, with a little faith, may be taken as free from ills, and worthy of full and personal cultivation, but rejected for lack of faith, and the familiarity of old thoughts and notions of heroism. In either adaptation, the result is the same. Conway is the only one to survive the journey back to the world. It's made explicit in the film, where it was implicit in the book. The woman dies of near instant old age, but not before saving Conway in the book. The malcontent dies, and there are no surviving porters to verify the existence of Shangri-La. All too quickly, and far too late, Conway realizes his mistake and ends the story struggling to return to Shangri-La, the one place that he could find a meaningful existence. While the 1937 film provides the Hollywood-mandated happy ending, Conway explicitly finds Shangri-La again, the book leaves it utterly ambiguous as to whether Conway ever returns. If nothing else, the story is inspirational enough that those who miss him seem to wish him luck in finding it again, and hope that we all might find our own personal Shangri-Las, the one thing in our lives that we would forever strive for. The tragedy is all too clear to me personally, so I found more engagement in a different question. In a place as close to earthly paradise as Shangri-La is presented, what is something worth giving back? The various characters in the book and films find ways to contribute to the well-being of the Blue Moon Valley inhabitants. In the book, the nun wants to start her own Christian mission and starts learning Tibetan to do it. The American hedge fund manager turned wanted man starts wanting to dig up gold in the valley, but in the film turns to installing a plumbing system for the people. And in the first film, a paleontologist decides to teach geology to the locals for all the various ways they can make use of the discipline themselves. What would I offer? Physically, I'd want to build aircraft or airships and teach them how to fly. Try not to be too surprised. But this would not be an imposition, much less any obligation, or it would not be something worth giving, because in those cases, it would be an exploitation, and that's something the Tibetan people of that valley should not abide. I found a quote lately, ostensibly attributed to a French writer and pilot, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up the men to gather wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. So this is my pitch to them. The world is much larger and greater beyond the icy winds surrounding your valley, and holds much beauty to offer you, while you have much to offer in return, and you deserve to discover that. That's just the elevator pitch. Here's the full proposal. Here, you are safe. Here, you have cultivated a beautiful, fulfilling existence. And just beyond the mounts surrounding this, your valley, the winds and snow protect you from all outsiders, including the ones that might mean you harm. I will not say that this will never change, but I will say that time changes all things. We were brought here by new technological means. We were flown in on an aeroplane. And the time will come soon that aeroplanes can routinely fly at heights and ranges far enough that your valley will be accessible by air. We, who were brought here, can become part of your great valley and lamasery, but in time, you may receive visitors who will not simply elect to remain, as many others have before us, despite your superlative hospitality. This is what I foresee. If new visitors come and perceive no cost or risk to the journey, and see what you've grown here as accessible and freely given, it will become very easy for those visitors, no matter who or what they are, to think to claim ownership over you and what you've made. And they may be courteous or magnanimous in light of your hospitality. Alas, they may also too easily fall into thinking of claiming exclusive ownership to you, your valley, and what you've built. When different people both claim exclusive ownership over the same things, they may disregard manners, the need to show kindness and care first and foremost, and decide to coerce each other, and even you, into upholding their exclusive ownership. Outside this valley, various peoples, whole nations, have confronted this problem, that others would coerce them into being owned as objects of rule and wealth, and have devised a variety of ways to protect themselves and their futures. Nations have turned to force, and the threat of force, the organization of their populations to hold arms, or support those holding arms against aggressors and invaders, eventually using that force and its threat to mark and enforce borders, boundaries, and exclusive ownership themselves. That these can become empire and become the very thing they would oppose to preserve themselves is a contradiction too often accepted as necessary. But this is not what I offer you. You do not have to be governed by the need to repel visitors as invaders, nor enforce borders of your own. I would see you earn your wings so that you can do something far more profound. If you so choose, you can go out into the world, see all the people and beauty it has to offer, and add something very important. Like an errant seed carried on the wind to new lands, you can show people and nations of the world that the home and society and culture you've made here can be built and cultivated anywhere. There are so many that will find disbelief easy. But in my experience, there are plenty of others who would take your example to heart, and if you share your ways, you may find places to grow and reach full blossom that you or others might never have thought possible. Your lamasery, Shangri-La, has been founded as a repository of knowledge, art, culture, and historical records because the lamas believe that these would be vulnerable to total destruction in some future worldwide spanning war that would by and by leave nothing of human civilization to stand. They also believe that only here, in the Valley of the Blue Moon, where some unique aspects of this place that allow a great extension of human life, can they see their mission fulfilled in due time. I cannot say they are wrong, that there won't be some future war destructive enough to snuff out the light of human culture. I cannot say they are wrong, that Shangri-La may be the last standing repository of human progress, were such worldwide destruction come to pass. I will say they are wrong because I have plenty of reason to doubt that a critical mass of humanity will choose suicide by mass mutual destruction, and most importantly, I will say they are wrong that only Shangri-La can be that refuge of humanity protected from mass violence. By taking flight and, should you choose, going out into the world to discover the full breadth of human life as can be known, you can bring the enlightenment that Shangri-La offers and encourage other people to turn away from ignorance, selfishness, and suspicion they found so familiar, and take a chance on the kindness, openness, and empathy that you so well embody. Not that you are servile or exploitable, but worthy of the utmost trust and fellowship, and that your example is the worthiest to follow. If a tyrant demands violence and conquest for whatever reasons, you can show people that such demands are a folly, and in view of closer relations between people, such demands can be ignored or undercut. If a people is attacked, no matter by who, you can show the way to solidarity and the common knowledge and social unity that induces a more universal, united defense of humanity and blunts or undercuts the rapacious party. As I understand, your lamas believe that all that is beautiful and delicate can only persist in Shangri-La. I believe they are wrong. By offering you the chance to fly, I believe you can show everyone that what is beautiful and delicate can also be durable and can find root and blossom anywhere.